You are listening to Frog Talk, presented by Black Ribbit.
Welcome to another episode of Frog Talk, and it seems I have a little bit of a frog in my throat today, so please bear with me a little bit. At Frog Talk, we discuss the ins and outs of branding and the modern workplace. Today, we're exploring how authentic leadership development transforms not just individual leaders, but entire organizational cultures, and why the most effective leaders are the ones who've done the hard inner work first. I'm joined by Robin Ferguson, owner and master certified coach at RA Ferguson Coaching and Consulting, where she spent over 15 years and over 2,500 coaching hours helping leaders live and lead like they mean it. Robin holds a master's in organizational development psychology and a master coaching credential, the highest level awarded by the International Coaching Federation. She founded and led the internal leadership and executive coaching program at Children's Mercy, Kansas City, growing it to over 25 coaches, co-founded the Barry Institute Leadership Center, and has held executive leadership roles spanning healthcare all through spiritual organizations. Most recently, she's authored The Phoenix Effect, Transcend Limitation, and Ignite the Power Within You. Wow. Welcome, Robin.
Thanks, Nader. It's great to be with you. I appreciate that intro.
Absolutely. That was awesome to read through. I'd love to actually just kind of start at the beginning, because you've accomplished so much. So, how did you end up in this particular space? I particularly really appreciate the bridge between sort of the practical and the ethereal, which is always very interesting to me. So,
well, it's been a winding road, that's for sure. So I think the thing that has linked it all is I've always had a compelling desire to uplift humanity in some way. Even as a child, I felt that and really was aware of suffering and things going on in the world and felt like I needed to find meaning within that and also do something about that. So, my career started as a nurse. That was my first, hands-on helping others. And then my kind of spiritual path led me into ministry. So I was the senior minister of 2 churches, and then from there, went into consulting with our worldwide organization and began consulting with leaders and boards on developing their organizations. And that led me back to this healthcare organization that I was a part of for 10 years and part of OD, part of starting the coaching program, the Leadership Institute, et cetera. So I think the combination of that for me is, I am a possibility thinker and an eternal optimist. So whatever's going on, no matter how messy it is, I always feel like there's something being born from that. I started as a NICU nurse, so I went to a lot of deliveries and, birth is messy, but look at the outcome and how amazing that can be. So as a coach and consultant, I hold that for people and organizations when it gets messy. But also as a nurse, it's like, you got to get real, right? Because how many organizations go through, courses or bring in consultants, and then they have these grand ideas, and then a year later, they're not actually applying any of it. Yeah. So you've got to look at, what are we dealing with right now? What's the current situation? And how do we practically create a plan so that we can get this off the ground and make it a part of the culture?
I was just talking about that yesterday with a ERP guy, and how there's this fear of change in the market because there are all these articles constantly going out about how people, companies are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get an ERP system put up and put into place and so on, but it never actually gets implemented. And it's just a lot of people. What's the saying that consultants putting stars in people's eyes, making it sound so simple and, oh, it's no problem, and all these sort of sweetening the pot, as it were. And to your point, it's not real. It will be contentious. There will be tension. It's going to be hard. It's going to hurt.
Yeah, I know we like to grab onto these ideal states to avoid dealing with what's currently happening, whether that be personally or as organizations. And I just had somebody ask me a question about change, and they were talking about, how do you um, help people like continue to see what the payoff of this is and focus on that. And I said, it's really about learning to live in the messy middle, because if you're evolving as a person, as an organization, you're always going to be in the messy middle in some part of it, right? So if you don't learn to address that and be real about that and get comfortable being uncomfortable, then yeah, it's just not a
Yeah,
practical thing, because that's going to come back
absolutely.
to haunt you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just hit on all of it. We only evolve through conflict. We only evolve through the tension. And if you exist in the tension, then you're consistently evolving. I used to tell people, you reminded me of when in the early days of my career, when some of my coworkers would complain about not getting a raise or something. They're like, I've been here 2-3 years, and I'm like, well, you're getting your minimal percent every year, but where's your, like, show me your job description. And then they'd show it to me, and I'd say, so are you doing anything outside of this list? And they're like, no. And I said, then why would anyone pay you more? You're doing exactly what you're getting paid for. If you want to get paid more, you should always be doing basically the job of the job ahead of you, so it's always going to be hard.
The job ahead of you, or even the job that doesn't exist yet. I'm a big proponent when I work with individual leaders, looking at, okay, what do you see that's not happening in your organization that you could do or that you could bring to the table? Just because that job doesn't exist doesn't mean you can't create it and work your way into it. And that's, when I started the coaching program within the healthcare organization, we didn't have anything like that, but there was a need there, and it came from that.
Absolutely. So you say you're one part let's get real and one part what's possible here, which I think is really cool. You already mentioned that. How does that balance shape the way that you help leaders create more authentic organizational cultures?
When we look at the evolution of leadership over time, and historically, we've gone from, that command and control model to that transactional model, where if you do these things, you'll get a bonus, you'll get a promotion, you'll get a whatever, there's a payoff, into more of a visionary leadership model. And now we're in this organic collaborative leadership style, and that requires authenticity. And so when a leader can be authentic, and, it's just like when you meet somebody at a party, or in any other situation, who are you going to be drawn to? The people that are
Yeah.
real, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same with leadership. And as we look at, especially Gen Z coming into the workforce, they're a no BS generation.
Yeah.
So
God
that,
bless them.
yeah. Hey, they know what they want, and
Yeah.
they're going for it. But I think when a leader can be authentic and admit that, wow, I got that wrong, or I don't have all the answers here, it engenders loyalty from the people that follow them. They want to follow someone like that because it gives them permission then to take risks and maybe fall down and be human themselves. But the good part about that is leaders get to be fallible, and previously, and it still exists in a lot of cultural DNA in organizations, there's this idea that leaders have to have all the answers, and that they have to, present this idea that they, never make mistakes. And that's not relatable. That doesn't engender an atmosphere of collaboration or buy-in from your team members.
That's so true. I mean, you're just speaking my language.
Mhm.
It's the same. It's just design thinking. It's a design thinking model.
Yeah.
You need to
Yeah.
be able to empathize with
Mhm.
everyone across the board, up and down the ladder, across the ladder, and so on. And um, you can't really do that if you don't see people who for who they are. If
Mhm.
they're constantly guarded or performing, as it were, then um, it's really hard to, like, get on the same level. And even
Mhm.
I try to instill a culture of managing up and down. Like,
Mhm.
if you're an intern, We try to instill a mindset of, manage your supervisor, manage the person
Hmm.
that's telling you, quote, what to do, question them if you don't feel something is right, and then of course, fail fast and fail forward. Don't be afraid to fail. So what do you, I guess I love that you brought up Gen Z because uh, so there's an interesting concept in the workplace. There's a very real generational gap. We've never had this wide of a gap in the workplace probably ever. I think the maximum is like 70 years. It's like just crazy. And so where are you seeing sort of the most friction when it comes to older leaders who are more used to old school styles, more archaic sort of formats, and potentially younger leaders? And where does sort of that contention lie within mindset, within actual process, within outcome? What are you noticing there?
The older generations, this new style of leadership can be a bit foreign to them. And so when they're trying to embrace more of a hierarchical model, that's not going well. At the same time, Gen Z and the younger generations come in with such innovative ideas and have been given permission to think outside the box. And that can really contribute to the organization moving forward. At the same time, they don't always honor the history and don't always honor the fact that this person that's been around in the organization a long time holds some really valuable information. So I think that's where, if you can connect the dots and support conversations around, okay, let's look at our history. What have we done that's worked? What have we done that's failed? What is so great about this foundation that we stand on, and really honor that? And then how can we use pieces of that to innovate from? It connects the dots for people, and you can generate some really amazing conversations.
And that speaks back to your collaboration concept.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're bringing the conversation from both sides together, then you can learn from each other.
Hmm. And it really, I think leaders that have operated under an older model have made leadership way harder than it needs to be. They
Yeah.
they're not enjoying their job because they're feeling like, I'm carrying all these burdens. I got to figure it out. So if you can paint a picture that, wow, if you can shift that and let go of problem solving and say, I don't have the answer, but I believe the answer is at this table. So let's talk. And that creates loyalty within organizations. It creates buy-in from your employees. The biggest, when you look at surveys across organizations, one of the biggest pieces of feedback they get is, I don't feel I have a voice. And so it gives people a voice to say, oh, my leader's coming to me and saying, hey, let's figure this out together. Suddenly the leader's like, oh, I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to be the one that sets the course all the time. So leaders have a role, and they certainly create strategy based on that input, but they don't have to be the ones to figure it all out. And so, yeah, they make leadership way harder than it needs to be. It doesn't have to be that serious.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I so appreciate that you said that because I feel like it's still a two-way street. There's definitely expectations from um teams. They walk into a company, they might have their own preconceived notions or just expectations based on what they believe to be true versus, or including their own experiences. Let's say it's a younger millennial, like a 30 mid 30s employee. Like they're kind of in a weird space because they're experiencing older millennials and Gen X sort of supervisors that are also on the cusp of kind of like older models and newer models, but have also experienced newer models. So there's this confusion of like, what am I walking into and what is the right way to do this? Do I get a voice? Do I have to just listen and follow? It's Actually, I would love to hear, how you mitigate that kind of confusion.
I was recently reading about this study where they watched kids on a playground, and they set them loose on this playground that was just, in a neighborhood, not surrounded by anything. And they noticed that the kids stayed together in kind of the where the equipment and things were. They sort of huddled together, and then they took them to a playground that had a fence around it. And all of a sudden, the kids were like running everywhere and were much more free. And I thought, what an amazing example that is of how we need to lead, how we need to set parameters in organizations. So, how are you defining the fence around the playground? So that the people within have the freedom to play. So millennials need that. Like, what are the parameters here? What's the what's the guidelines? What are we operating by? So that we can then, be more creative and innovative within that.
That's so cool. If people are listening, my smile is cutting my face right now because the I always say I'm a strategist, I'm a designer, so I'm like, you have to build the box to think outside of it,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like your story is just making my heart sing right now. That's so cool.
Yeah.
What an awesome little experiment. That's so
Hmm.
cool.
I know.
Uh,
I thought it was just a perfect metaphor for how we need
Absolutely.
to create change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Um, so going back to your philosophy of authenticity and
Hmm.
really, showing up, being real, as you said. Can you walk us through what leading like you mean it actually looks like in practice? So speaking to, again, the generational gap, or even
Hmm.
potentially lifestyle discrepancies, industry discrepancies. How does it
Hmm.
change organizational culture to lead like you mean it?
Yeah. Um, I think it does come back to that self-awareness piece. So, if you have an awareness of what is your natural leadership style, what's not, what are your strengths, what are they not, um, then you can create a more collaborative environment, but you also own what is yours to do. And I talk a lot about roles. There's I when I coach, there's a lot of going into situations maybe where you have to present to the C suite, and there's this intimidation factor about, what do I have to contribute here? All these people are more educated, they're higher titles, whatever. I talk about everybody at the table has a role, and you have a role here, and you're giving them information that they need and they may want. So what if you took the titles off of the people around the table, and you just looked at what's my role? My role in this meeting may be to lead, even though I have a title that is less than the people around the table. So I think leading like you mean it means we all own our ability to lead. It's not necessarily about the title. It's about, what do I bring to the table? Am I owning that? And am I also honoring the fact that there's things I don't bring to the table that I can help call out in someone else and say, hey, let's work together. So that's how I would define it.
How do you instill that so that it's comfortable or like embodied?
Hmm. Yeah. Who said it was comfortable, Nadir? It's not
Nobody. We said
comfortable.
you have to live in the tension.
Right. Right. But the tension is the opportunity for creativity, right? That's where that lives, is that creative space. Because, when you haven't headed yet in a particular direction, then all possibilities are open to you. So, I like thinking about change. If you can approach it as an experiment, that's a way that you can help bring people into that who are more resistant to change. If you can say, we're going to experiment with this way of doing things, and we're going to give it 6 months, and then we're going to get feedback. And, if it's an experiment, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. But if you say, here's what we're doing, and you need to change the way you do something, I'm going to normally resist, because it's like, wait, I don't have the information. I don't feel competent in that. So, I think creating an environment where we're always in a place of experimenting can help open that up for people.
So play.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Play in it.
yeah, yeah, I like that. There's a lot of design thinking happening here.
Hmm.
It's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm credentialed in human-centered design.
Yeah.
So I look at companies like IDEO, for example, that I know you're familiar with, but
Yeah.
it's this idea that how can you bring people together from different roles in an organization? And rather than the leader saying, we need to decide where we're going, how do you get input from people that are impacted by these changes? And, the thing I love about that IDEO kind of set the course for that idea is let me bring a musician in, let me bring an engineer in, let me bring a business person in, and let's figure out how to create a new way to keep potato chips from breaking. And they came up with the Pringles box. So how can you do that in your organization? Bring somebody from environmental services in, bring somebody who's on the front line. What combination of people can you bring in and say, here's the problem we're having as an organization, let's brainstorm. And that creates a space of creativity.
Yeah, exactly. The diversity breeds creativity. And um yeah, our model is built on design thinking. So like when we go into companies and do our initial analysis and evaluations, we're talking to everybody in the organization, down, up and down the ladder, from the founder, CEO, and so on through to the door guy. And it's very different because people are often used to just, going as low as middle management and kind of stopping there. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't have the same opinion that the guy at the front does, and his opinion matters just as much, maybe more.
And they see things that other people in other roles are not going to see. And that comes back to the part about getting real, because it helps you get real about what is the environment here, because the leaders are insulated a lot of times from, they think everything's going great. And then you talk to somebody on the front line, they're like, no. So it's the get real part, but it also helps create the practical part, because if you're getting input from all these different places, you're realizing, how can we create change here that feeds the needs of people across the organization, not just some ideal that we're hoping for.
It's fun hearing, I want this, I want that, I want us to look like this, I want us to feel
Mhm.
like this from leadership. And then
Mhm.
I always say, well, let's just go talk to everyone and see how you actually look. And then we'll
Yeah.
talk about what you actually want, and then see,
Yeah.
what's even worth focusing on here, what's worth highlighting, because what
Mhm.
you want is probably not what it's going to be. I can tell you that right now.
Right, right. Yeah. And not what's effective, in
What's
supporting the
exactly.
organization and moving
Yeah,
forward. Yeah, I love that.
absolutely. um well, I always, I respond with, what you want may be what it is, but what it is what it's going to be.
Mhm.
The point is, like, whatever is true is what it's going to be. You want to create an atmosphere of something. Well, we need to go figure out how this place is already perceived, and then bring to
Yeah.
the surface the strengths that make this place what it is. To your point, it's authentic truth,
Mhm.
the real part of this organization. What you want might just be bells and whistles, but we can't even verify that until we go do the work.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where your people that have been around, 20, 30 years can give you historical context for, what they already tried and didn't work, what they see as the strengths of the organization and the core that you can then take and build on and innovate from.
Yeah, exactly right. Um, so talking about building specific internal cultures, you founded and scaled a coaching program at Children's Mercy to 25 plus coaches. Um, what does it take to build that kind of internal coaching culture rather than just offering coaching as either a perk or some, third party benefit?
Well, it really happened organically.
Hmm.
I've been on panels with other internal leaders that have founded coaching programs, and they always say, get buy-in from stakeholders and, make sure they're behind it. And yeah, that didn't happen. COVID hit. And my leader said, hey, we need to start thinking of ways we can better support our leaders during this stressful time. And so I got together with a couple coaches in the organization, and we were doing coaching, but less formally. We were doing it through our leadership development, executive development work. And we're like, we've talked about standing up a program, let's do it. And so we put everything together, our agreements, we got an internal website, we had the whole thing structured, and then came to our leader and said, well, you asked, and here's what we're doing. And so he was a little taken back for a minute, like, oh, wow, I've heard nothing about this. And we felt like it was our best opportunity to move it because we understood what coaching was and what it could do for the organization. And not all of our leaders did understand that. So we put it together and we started, and it started with just the three of us. And then I ended up taking over the program. And we started bringing leaders within the organization. We started training them as coaches. And by the time I left, we had over 25 coaches across the organization. So this was a healthcare organization. So we had physician leaders, we had nurse executives, we had non-clinicians, and they would split their roles. So a lot of times they were people that maybe were at the end of their career wanting to transition their career. And so they would give, 10 or 20% of their time to coaching. And it just grew from there, and we became a community. And what really allowed then the stakeholders to buy into that was because it was successful. Like we were getting such amazing feedback, and people were changing, people were staying that were burned out and were like, I'm done. I don't know what else I can do. All of a sudden we're like finding innovative ways to stay in their job, to grow their job, to support their teams. And so that's how we did it. There's a lot of ways to go about it, but I'm like I said, I'm a big believer in saying, where do I sit right now, and what can I do that's innovative with what I already have, and create it.
That's so interesting. That's fascinating, actually. Is that so? How large was the organization itself?
10,000 employees, about 900 leaders. And so we focused on leadership and executive coaching. And then we had some ways to support our employees as well. But yeah, our team focused on that.
So I'm curious about the just the practical output of that. So is that because there's I can imagine there's all this internal marketing that goes with that. You're letting internal communications. You have to let the organization know this thing exists, that we exist, that we're here for you, that and so on. So how did that rollout actually look, and how did people respond to it? Who were you serving? Who was your sort of who was your customer, I guess, internally? I'm just curious about the dynamics of that. That's so interesting to me. It's like a business within a business.
Yeah, it really is. And we started quietly because there was only three of us. So uh, so we were involved in other projects, and I was working with our leadership institute. So we just would mention it initially as we kind of figured things out and worked through the kinks. And then, as we started growing the program and bringing more coaches on, we introduced it through town halls, through our, internal website and things like that. But a lot of it was word of mouth. One leader would get coaching, and then they'd say, hey, do you know this is there? I'm working with this coach. I recommend it. So a lot of it grew organically as a result of that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's just, and it's still there.
Still going strong. In fact, I was just at the ICF, the International Coaching Federation conference, and met the person who had taken on my role. And so we were chatting about, what's happened and where it's going. So, yeah.
That's great. I mean, congrats. Honestly, that's such a cool idea. I really love that. So you talk about bold decision making being less thinking and more doing. What cultural barriers prevent leaders from making bold moves?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. There's always the doing it the way we've always done it
Mhm.
kind of mentality that comes in there. I think the not getting real interferes with that,
Mhm.
because it's like I said, we want to grab on to some ideal state and not deal with what's actually happening. And so, yeah, being in that messy middle is important understanding of, okay, what are we dealing with here? And then how do we turn it on its head?
Yeah.
Part of the what I've written about is based on the idea of the phoenix, that the ancient story goes that this bird, starts to build a nest, and rather than lay eggs, it starts to warm it and set itself on fire. And out of the ashes, the breath of life breathes over the ashes, and it arises as, a transformed, even more amazing creature.
Mhm.
The process organizations and people have to go through to really create the ability to reinvent yourself is looking at what are those old ingrained stories? How have we defined ourselves? What does that look like? And which one of those maybe served a purpose at a time or got us to a point, but it's time to let go of that story? Which ones have we been telling for a long time that were total crap to begin with? And which ones do we want to, how do we want to create and write a new narrative, and how can we give ourselves permission to do that? So it's really kind of a threefold process of, let's break it down, let's look at what we want to take forward, what we want to let go of, let's sit in that messiness for a bit, and out of that, let's take that creative energy and start to rewrite a story for our life, for our organization, for my leadership. How do I reinvent myself as a leader? What does that look like? So I think that whole idea of reinvention, um, when you can help guide people through that and they see the point of staying in the messiness and that it is a creative opportunity, I think it helps people then make those bold moves and say, okay, here's who we want to be going forward. Let's start writing that story.
That speaks to your process of exploring transcending limitations through your Phoenix effect. That's what I'm hearing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, we take on so many, personally, if you think about it, how many stories and definitions do we take on through our life based on our parents, based on the culture, based on our religious traditions, based on our schooling, based on media that's constantly telling us, who we need to be. And a lot of that comes from, you need to be something other than you are. So part of this is, let me break down those stories and say, no, I'm okay. Like, that's not me. I saw a commercial. I was watching the football game and a commercial came on that said, confidence doesn't come from within. And I was like, what? And it was for a pickup truck. And it was basically saying, if you buy this truck, then you'll be confident. And I'm like,
Is
what a
this from
message.
when did you see that commercial
This was
this
like a
year?
few weeks ago. Yeah.
This sounds like something out of the 80s. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Nope. Nope. Yeah. So, how many messages do we get? We're not thin enough. We're not taking the right vacations. We're not, wearing the right clothes, whatever. So we're constantly bombarded with these messages about who we need to be. And we take that on and we end up, doing somersaults trying to become that, when confidence really comes from owning who you are and being okay with that self-acceptance. And it's the same with organizations, it's the same with leaders, is, how can I accept who we are and really find the value in my history and in those stories and where they got me, but also question them and say, does this fit who we're becoming? No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really smart. It's amazing how much our models have in common, because when I talk about core values, I'm talking about specifically three non-negotiable pillars that exist within your organization that are the formal definition of your identity, and they can't exist without the other. All three have to exist simultaneously in order for you to elicit a specific kind of response, because it's coming from a place of truth. And so, um and that grows with you, it scales with you, whether you want to scale down or scale up or whatever. It's always those three things, and they're non-negotiables. They're essentially your belief system that guide everything you do. So if ever it's if in the individual, it's our instinct. What is your instinct as an individual? It's that truth. Some people call that God's will. So, defining that at the organizational level is pretty amazing, because then you create a system where the entire organization, everyone included, behaves through that lens. And so when you behave through that lens, you elicit a certain very specific response. And that response is your brand.
To be effective and to really evolve into this new model that we're talking about of leading, of collaborating, you have to come from a mindset of being in service to others. Um, because, otherwise my ego is going to get in the way. Like, oh, my title, I want to take credit for this. You really have to gain value from empowering others, from lifting others up. And when you come from that mindset, then even when you fail or fall flat or don't show up, how you wanted to, people forgive you, because it's like, oh, you had my best interest at heart. This organization has our best interest at heart. They may need to make some adjustments because this isn't quite working, but I trust as an employee that they're working for my good, for our good. And the same if you're serving customers, is how do you come from that place as well?
I echo that. I say you're serving your employees, don't forget that they're humans and you're serving them. And then ultimately, to your point, if you can instill that mindset, then it becomes a two-way street. It's a collective, we're serving each other. And that reciprocity can just manifest beautiful things. Um, Speaking of, so you've worked across different environments, very different environments. You've worked in healthcare, spiritual organizations, and corporate. What are sort of universal truths about leadership culture that you have discovered across very potentially different environments and spaces?
Yeah. Leadership truths. That's interesting to think about, because I don't know that I would call them truths necessarily. Leadership ideas, sometimes leadership fallacies. I think it's what we've talked about a little bit, is that this idea that leaders are responsible for everything and that they have to take all that on themselves. And even those who are really great at empowering others, who are in service, they have such a dedication to what they're doing that they feel this overwhelming sense of responsibility that sometimes gets in their way. Um, the other piece is that problem solving is the best approach. I think that's kind of a universal idea when it comes to leadership, is that we're here to solve problems. And when you're in a problem solving mindset, then you're constantly focusing on the problem, and you're always looking for problems and how do we address that, rather than coming from a possibility mindset and saying, this is what exists, but what's possible within it. So yeah, this is a challenge, this is an issue, but there's something that can come out of this that will help us move forward. So I think that's the biggest things that I constantly work with.
There's that design thinking again. Yeah, it's so interesting. It's a solution oriented mindset. So while you might see a problem, you don't focus on the problem. You actually start seeing solutions immediately. If you're, a trained designer, who sees systems and understands systems thinking and design systems and so on, everything becomes.
Well, I've worked with a lot of clinical executives, so physician executives, for example, and they're trained to solve problems, right? They're trained to look at a patient, look at what the problem is, diagnose the problem, treat the problem. And so when they then are in this high level executive position, they're coming from that mindset. And it is an entirely different skill set to be an empowering and collaborative leader. Yet there are some things you can draw again from people's stories, from people's history. When someone is coding, there's not one person, there's somebody that's maybe leading the team, but everybody has a role. And if it was just one person, that patient would probably die, as opposed to this one's pushing epi, this one's doing compressions, this one's, giving breaths, this one, so you can take that sort of, where are we starting from? How can I meet this person, this leader, where they're at, and use some of that history and as an example of how you can shift the mindset and operate from, a different lens.
How do you help leaders sort of balance the pressure to perform with the need to bring more joy into their teams, into their work, even whether it's for themselves or for their for the people working with them or for them?
Well, I think you help them understand that joy in the workplace actually creates more productivity. Um, And it's okay. Yeah, I was just working with a C-suite leader who's in finance, which is a very serious, industry. And she was saying, so many they've just introduced a new technology, and she said much of our time in meetings is spent with people griping about all the things that are wrong with it. And so I said, well, how about if you gave everybody a piece of paper and you said, write down your biggest, struggle or the thing you hate about this on the paper. And I said, and you do it too. And you go around the table and everybody just says that out loud. And you have a trash can in the middle of the table. And when they're done speaking it, they wad it up and they throw it in that trash can. And I said, I guarantee by the end of it, people will be laughing. People will feel like, oh, yeah, I hear you. I feel you. And you as a leader are modeling that too. So they're like, oh, wait, our leader is also struggling with this. Okay, it's okay for me to know that like it's not perfect here. And then you take that trash can off the table and you say, okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's look at how we can address this and what are some solutions we can come up with here. So, there's ways to lighten the environment and go, it's not the end of the world. And I think that's the part of me that's a nurse. I always say, is somebody dying here? No. Okay. Then we can think about this. Like, we've got time, we can breathe. We don't have to take this so seriously.
That's such a fun exercise. I feel like that's super effective.
Yeah, well, if you look at like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, there's also a change model based on that. And I think so many change models that I have studied go right to, here's the steps, right? But they don't look at the human emotion involved in change. And, people are at all stages of that, like going to acceptance. Some of them are just mad this is changing. Some of them are grieving the old way of doing things. If you don't address that and you don't get real about that and create a space for that, then people are getting stuck in that. So if you can create those exercises where people have, let's just take 5 minutes and vent, then you move on,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like that is super useful. Man, Robin, we have to have a part two because we're about up on time here. I want to keep talking.
Yeah.
But thinking about just looking ahead, I mean, ahead is coming so fast and it's coming faster every day. With all the changes that are taking place between remote work, hybrid work, AI in the workplace, in across industries and so on. What, again, like the new generations coming in, et cetera, et cetera. What do you believe will be the most critical for leaders trying to build cultures where people can both perform, feel seen, feel welcomed, like they want to be there, and ultimately thrive?
Yeah. Well, it's all the things that we've talked about in terms of authenticity. How can you be vulnerable as a leader? And how can you engage in the space with your team, with your employees, so that you create a sense of psychological safety and comfort across the organization that, oh, I can throw out an idea that, is new and innovative and it's not going to get shut down, or at least it's going to be heard. So, you have to model that first as a leadership team. And I think that's the biggest thing going forward that is going to create successful leadership, successful organizations for sure.
The inner work. Just looking at yourself.
Mhm.
I think that's
Mhm.
critical ultimately.
Yeah.
Um, the big question I ask is, would you work for you? And
Mm. Yeah.
that seems to be a good gut punch for many people. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I love
yeah.
that question. I'm writing that one down.
Actually, so the exercise really is like, make it awkward. You look at yourself in the mirror, make
Mhm.
eye contact with yourself, and ask it in the exactly those words. The syntax is
Mhm.
important. You can't say, "Would I work for me?" You have to
Right.
say, "Would you work for you?" Looking at you, and
Mhm.
it gets
Mhm.
really awkward.
I bet. I bet it does. I do a leader as coach workshops and things with teams, and one of the things I talk about is how you become more coach like in your leadership, and we talk about listening, and people are like, oh, I'm a great listener, and so I have them sit for 2 minutes while someone tells them their story and say, you can't say a word, you just have to listen, and I want you to observe what's going on in your head. And they come out of that and they're like, oh my gosh, I was like relating to the story and I wanted to share something. I wanted to ask more questions. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So listening is really about being completely present with someone and really like paying attention to not just the words, but the body language. And so,
Exactly.
anyway, yeah, it's, you got to get uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's amazing. Robin, thank you
Mhm.
so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure. Honestly, I would love to keep talking because we can
Yeah,
just
I'd
go into
love
this
to
so
come back.
deeply. Yeah.
Mm.
For our guests out there, if they want to reach you, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
You can go to my website, robin-ferguson.com. And also, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So if you want to reach out, either of those is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. So just Robin Ferguson on LinkedIn. And then I also have some things that I've begun posting on YouTube under my name. So you can find things on across YouTube. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Just love to hear what your experiences are out there, what you're struggling with, what you're related to. I'm always here to talk. So
Thank you. And what is one sort of tip you would give people to start thinking about whether they're leaders or they want to be leaders or even, are independents? What is one tip to sort of get them into a mindset of this being real, as it were?
I'd say stop and take a look at maybe one story that you're ready to let go of. And really get into that. Like, where did that story come from? What's that about? How's it serving me? How has it served me? And how is it not serving me anymore? And I'm big on doing some kind of ritual because I think if you bring it into your physical reality, that helps you. So I'm big on like writing things out and burning them and that kind of thing. So what is that story? Be with that for a minute, get uncomfortable with it, and then do something that really tangibly helps you let go of that. And then what do you want to write? How do you want to write a new narrative? And yeah, and my book's out there if you want to go through a deeper process with that, because it really does take you through a process of breaking that down and looking at that, and then exercises to start writing a new narrative for yourself.
Very good. Robin Ferguson, thank you so much for being here, and I will talk
Yeah.
to you soon.
Yeah, great talking with you.